Hello, we are now recording. So remember that to access the recordings, they go out each week on Fridays in your Welty at Home letter. You just have to scroll down to the reading schedule and select recordings for all previous weeks there. Sorry. Um, Hello and welcome to the Welty at Home slow reading virtual book club that alternates works by Eudora Welty with works by authors connected to Welty. We are currently exploring Jesmyn Ward's novel Seeing Unburied Sing. During this series, we will read and discuss about 40 to 50 pages each week. My name is Anna Traylor, and I'm the education specialist at Eudora Welty House and Garden. I'm experiencing some technical difficulties today, so you will not be able to see me, but I am here. And I am so grateful to Suzanne Mars, Eudora Welty's friend and biographer and professor emerita of Millsaps College, for guiding these discussions. And we are also very grateful to be joined by our co-instructor, our guest instructor, Dr. Kamisha Swanson, who Suzanne will give a proper introduction to in just a moment. But first, just some quick housekeeping. To comment or ask a question, click the reaction button at the bottom of your screen and raise hand. If you're on a tablet or on a phone, you may have to tap the screen for this option to appear. A lively discussion often takes place in the chat as well, so be sure to glance over at the chat box every now and then. Suzanne, would you like to introduce our guest instructor?
Anna, your audio is breaking up. I hope mine's not. Can everyone hear me all right? Good. Well, we are today going to begin our discussions of this wonderful National Book Award winning novel by Jesmyn Ward, which has a head note from Eudora Welty. If you
I'm not getting any sound at all.
Just before the text begins, she quotes, "The memory is a living thing. It too is in transit, but during its moment, all that is remembered joins and lives, the old and the young, the past and the present, the living and the dead." And that certainly is a very relevant quote for these first two chapters that we have today. So we're reading a book by a distinguished Mississippian, and our discussions are going to be led by another distinguished Mississippian, Mississippi's own Kamisha Randall Swanson. It's a great honor to have her with us today. She's in class, I think, but she'll be here shortly. Dr. Swanson is a native of the Mississippi Delta. She holds a BA from Tougaloo College, an MA from the University of Mississippi, and a PhD from the University of Alabama. She is now an assistant professor at Mississippi State University, where she teaches classes in a wide range of subject areas, including Southern literature, African American literature, gender studies, and popular culture. A year ago, her first book with the wonderful title, Maverick Feminist, to be female and Black in a country founded upon violence and respectability, won the 2024 Eudora Welty Prize, presented annually at the Mississippi University for Women. And this spring, her second book, Conversations with Jesmyn Ward, will be published. I think you can buy both on Amazon or at your local bookstore, and I know that we'll all want to read these books. So I have written here, without further ado, but maybe I will have further ado because I was going to introduce.
Kamisha's there.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, there you are, Kamisha. I didn't see you. Welcome. And we are so honored to have you with us. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I was just realizing I haven't used Zoom in a while. I forgot how to actually share my screen. I was going to share my PowerPoint. Let's see.
But Anna can do that for you.
I can certainly do that for you. I had to refresh my memory as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Go ahead and pull that up right now.
Well, as she does that, thank you again, Suzanne, for that intro and that welcome. I am very excited to be able to discuss this book with you all. Like Suzanne said, edited the collection of interviews on Jesmyn Ward. It was supposed to come out actually in May, but it will be coming out in September now because in November I had the wonderful opportunity to actually go down to the coast and do a personal interview with Jesmyn Ward. So we are adding that to the collection, which postpones the publication date just slightly. So it will be out in September as opposed to May of this year. But I am very excited about that. I am also working on a book of literary criticism about Jesmyn Ward, temporarily titled Love and War, Intimacy and Activism in the Works of Jesmyn Ward, where I essentially talk about how basically being in intimate relationships, whether with a intimate partner or even a family member, a friend, for poor individuals in the rural South, like most of Jesmyn Ward's characters, is essentially an act of activism as well because of all of the different systemic issues that one has to face in order to kind of achieve this ultimate happiness and joy that you would want to achieve out of those intimate relationships. So I am excited to be talking about this book with you all. I look forward to the conversations that we will have. And I forgot to ask before I got too far into my spiel, but can everyone hear me fine?
I can. I think so.
Okay, awesome. All right. So, Anna, since you're sharing, you'll have to actually change the slides for me, correct? Or do I have the option to do that?
Anna, can you move it to the second slide? Yeah.
Thank you. So just a little bit about Ward herself. This paragraph, this quote actually comes from the collection that that I did edit, but looks like some things have changed in this version of it. Lowercase letters where they were supposed to be capital, but we'll move on. Um, so Jesmyn Ward was actually, although she is a native of the coast, she lives in DeLille now, where her family is from. She was actually born in Oakland, California. So, like a lot of Southern families during the time periods between the Great Migration and the end of the Black Arts or Black Panther movement, many rural Southerners actually moved to other places, typically in the North, in places like Harlem, Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, but also many moved to California, as did Jesmyn Ward's family, in hopes of getting away from this kind of rural sharecropping lifestyle where opportunities seem to be limited. But they unfortunately found themselves in California with different hardships, but hardships nonetheless. So her family moved back to Mississippi when she was 3 years old. She shares a little bit about that in her, well, a lot about that in her memoir, Men We Reaped. And that's where her younger siblings were born, where she has lived for the majority of her life, except for when she went to Stanford University to get both her BA and her MA, and also to Michigan, where she continued her education. But she also talks about growing up on the coast, and having this continuous hunger, a literal hunger because her family was poor, but also a hunger for a different lifestyle and experience, but also having somewhat of an imposter syndrome because she felt like growing up in the South did not permit her some of the opportunities that others may have been permitted. She was able to go to a private school with the help of one of her mother's employees. Her mother worked as a domestic worker in the homes of many wealthy white individuals on the coast who lived in beachfront homes. So she talks about all of that and the experiences that she had of being one of very few Black people in that school impacted her views on race, racism, and poverty. So that's just a little bit about her background in general. In this particular quote, I essentially talk about how her work is very fraught with hardships and troubles, but also very poetic. And she is a very similar person in person in real life, as the kids say, IRL. Her voice is soft spoken, but her words are always firm. She critiques oppressive systems and through her characters humanize and provide hope for Southern Black people. Since her first work was published in 2008 up until present day. Her writing is very unapologetic, very intimate, but it's also a good punch as well. So I'm very interested in hearing how you all are reacting to these first two chapters and having this conversation with you all in general. She talks about her family a lot, but also she talks about her writing process a lot. And her first novel, Where the Line Bleeds, was actually rejected several times, so much so that she decided that maybe writing wasn't for her, and she was actually beginning to contemplate entering nursing school instead. But her book was published by a Gate shortly thereafter, and of course, her career took off from that point. One of the publishers at a Gate said that he knew when he published that book that she had something special about her and that she would be great, but he could not fathom, of course, the type of career that she would have in such a very short time. And if you'll move to the next slide for me, thank you so much. Um, the next slide kind of shares some of the praise and receptions of her work. Is Anna still with us? I know she said she was having some difficulties. If I can figure out how to share my own screen, I could.
Is it not
But
sharing the slides if I click next?
say it again. I'm
Is
sorry.
it not moving the slides forward? It's saying that I'm on awards and reception. Is that the slide we're seeing?
Yes, I'm still seeing the one that says Jesmyn Ward.
Yeah, we just have a picture of Jesmyn Ward on our screens.
Oh, because that's yeah, I guess because it's saying that I'm moving forward. I'm so sorry, everybody. Let me
No, it's okay because I should have figured out how to share it myself, but like I
um,
said, it's been forever.
Anna, you can go to participant and choose Kamisha and transfer host.
I think she should be a host now. Gosh, this is a terrible way to get started, everybody. I believe Kamisha is as a host now, and if you click the green button that says share at the very bottom of the screen, that would be how you would share screen. Are you seeing your ability to share the screen, Kamisha?
No, I don't have a green button at the bottom. I don't
Okay,
know.
I'll try to reshare this PowerPoint here and see if it'll.
You move your cursor down to the bottom of the screen. Yeah, there.
Yeah, I don't see a share button at all. Like I said, I knew it's been a while, but I was looking for it and I don't see anything. But it's okay. We can continue. I would love for you all to actually see the slides, but the show can definitely go on without it. But I was going to yes, there we go. I can see it now. Just share a little bit about the praise that Ward has received for her works, specifically the one that we'll be discussing for the next 6 weeks. But you can see here her novels that she's published thus far. Where the Line Bleeds, again, was the first one that was initially rejected, and is also the one that is studied least. And you can definitely see her writing progress, her writing style rather, progress through each novel. But each of them are set, with the exception of Let Us Descend, in this fictional town that she creates, which is based off her own hometown of Delisle, Boy Savage. And then her second novel, Savage Bones, the one that we're reading today, Sing a Very Sing. Her memoir, Men We Reaped, an edited collection, The Fire This Time, which is inspired by, of course, James Baldwin, but also the murder of Trayvon Martin and the rise of Black Lives Matter movement. And then her most recent work, Let Us Descend, which I say is not set in Boy Sauvage, but if you have read it, I won't tell you what it's about if you have not. But if you have read it, you may know that the main character, Annis, goes on a voyage or travels at the end, and she actually does find herself in Boy Sauvage in those last few pages of the text. So, definitely this idea of place and home is a subject matter that is very important to Ward and that she tackles in these particular pieces. But in terms of the reception, of course, she has received great reception for her writing. One reviewer says the heart of Jesmyn Ward's Sing Unburied Sing is story, the yearning for a narrative to help us understand ourselves, the pain of the gaps we'll never fill, the truth that are failed by words and must be translated through ritual and song. Ward's writing throbs with life, grief, and love, and this book is the kind that makes you ache to return to it. Definitely, this idea of aching is one that many reviewers focus on because, like I said, each of her writings, although they are very poetic, Ward actually says that she's a failed poet, that she always wanted to be a poet, but found herself being better at writing narratives. So her writing is very poetic in that sense, but also very gut wrenching as well. So just briefly, this idea that her works are widely received. And of course, if you go to the next slide, which you are already on actually, awards
this
and
one.
reception, you can see that she has received numerous awards for her works. She is the first African American and first woman to win the National Book Award for Fiction twice. There are only, I think, four other people who have done that, and they are all white males. So she has broken a lot of glass ceilings in just a short amount of time since her first novel was published in 2008. She also won the Stegner Fellowship and the Black Caucus of the American Library Association Award after publishing Where the Line Bleeds. She was the Grisham Writer in Residence briefly at the University of Mississippi. She won the National Book Award, of course, for Salvage the Bones and also for the book that we're reading today, Sing Unburied Sing. She won a Heartland Prize for Nonfiction for Men We Read and the Living Strauss Award in 2016. In 2018, she was recognized by Time Magazine as amongst the 100 most influential people, and she was also honored with a marker on the Mississippi Writers Trail in 2018 as well. In 2022, she became the youngest person at the age of 45 to actually win the Library of Congress Prize for American Fiction. So she has become, again, a very renowned writer in such a short amount of time. In 2023, for her most recent book, she won the Mississippi Institute of Arts and Letters Award. The state of Mississippi in general has shown much appreciation for its daughter, as people say. So I've been glad, as a Mississippi native myself, to see that other Mississippians are appreciating the work that she's doing and sharing these particular stories about Mississippians. If we can go to the next slide. At the very top, it says new Toni Morrison because a critic at the American Booksellers actually said that she was a new Toni Morrison in terms of the type of writing that she's doing, especially this idea of forging into the supernatural, but also, again, the reception that she has garnered for her writing and the fact that her writing changes in each novel. She's talked a lot in interviews about, if of course, if you read all of her works or even several of them, you see that the style in which she writes, this poetic nature, is the same in all of them. But each narrative structure is different because she's constantly trying to think of a new way to engage her audience, think of a new way to grow as a writer. And that, again, is why she is often compared to Toni Morrison. On this slide, I have some of the works that have been published, larger works. Of course, you can find hundreds of individual articles in journals about Jesmyn Ward and her work, but the Xavier Review published a journal issue specifically related to her works. I think it was last year that this collection of critical essays came out titled Jesmyn Ward New Critical Essays. Again, Conversations with Jesmyn Ward will be out later this year, along with the writings of Jesmyn Ward by Martin Bone. So she is being studied academically as well. And as I mentioned, my book will hopefully be out in 2026, Love and War, Intimacy and Activism in the Works of Jesmyn Ward. So that's just a little bit about her in general. We can go to the next slide, and get closer to actually talking about the book. And when we get to that part, I'm going to try to talk less and let you all talk more. But she talks about how in Sing Unburied Sing, um, of course, the main character, JoJo, is the character who comes to her first. She knew that she wanted to write a tale about an interracial boy, but she found herself struggling with how to actually tackle this particular story. Initially, when she wrote JoJo, his mother was white and his father was black, but she said that that didn't feel right for the story that she was trying to tell. She actually wrote the first chapter draft several times and eventually moved away from it and stopped working on it altogether. And that's when she wrote her memoir, Men We Reaped. After she wrote Men We Reaped, she tackled the chapter again, still struggled, and did research, tried to step away from it. And she found herself reading a lot about prison, specifically Parchment, and came up on facts that Parchment Farm actually had 12 and 13-year-old boys there doing the work of grown men who were um, convicted and sometimes held life sentences at the age of 12, and how that touched her and impacted her. And she knew that she had to add a character like that in her novel. And of course, we get Richie, which we have been briefly introduced to, but we'll learn about more in the later chapters. So Richie is kind of the inspiration for this ghost story, as many people describe it. It has been described as a road novel, and that's initially what she wanted it to be. But when she discovered Richie as a character, she says that he kind of took on a life of his own, and she allowed the novel to do what it wanted to do. So, Parchment and this idea that 12 and 13-year-olds between the 1930s and 50s were in prison with adults is what her inspiration is for the novel that we see as Sing Unburied Sing today. And of course, we are discussing this work in connection to Eudora Welty. So we can go to the next slide. Suzanne already read the epigraph for the novel that she pulls from Eudora Welty. In an interview, she talked about why this particular quote was significant to her. She mentions that in all of her works, one thing that she's grappling with in different ways, of course, for each novel is this idea of time. So, specifically in this work, she realized that time was not linear, that the past bears up on both the present and the future. So, the quote from Welty, where she talks about memory and it being this living thing, plays a strong significance to this work for this reason. She says that one of the reasons that I love that quote so much and why I think it is so applicable to the story that I'm telling is because a question that the book is asking about how the past bears on the present. For me, the quote about memory being a living thing is another way to say that the past is not the past, that time isn't linear. That's the theme that I'm wrestling with in the book. These ghosts from the past hunt those in the present because of enslavement, because of Jim Crow, because of the terrible history of Parchment Prison and of places like Parchment Prison. all of that, which hypothetically happened in the past, reverberates into the future and into the present. So that's the most obvious connection to Eudora Welty, but there are other similarities in their writing. If we go to the next slide, of course, they are both Mississippians who focus a lot, if not all of their works, on this kind of complex life that Americans in the South live, or specifically in Mississippi for Jesmyn Ward. They also both tackle themes of family and community and have a deep sense of place in their writing, explore race and social issues, and use symbolism to invoke a lot of meaning in their writing. Anyone want to comment on anything I've said so far? I always tell my students that I'm kind of a facilitator. I actually don't like to talk a whole lot. I want to hear what other people have to say too. I have some questions that we'll dive into in a minute, but I just wanted to stop to see if anyone has anything pressing that they wanted to say right now.
I can't see hands from Anna. Can you?
No, I don't see any hands.
Okay, awesome. Well, we can go to the next slide where I just give an overview of the themes in the novel. I've mentioned some of them in discussing the similarities between Welty's writing and Ward's, but there are a host of other things, some that aren't even included in this lesson. I do hope that we will talk about some of them in a few moments, but family and generational bonds, intergenerational trauma, race, poverty, and oppression, death, loss, and the supernatural, of course, love and sacrifice, and love in this particular case is not always selfless, sometimes flawed, but still significant. Identity and coming of age, of course, in the opening scene, which we'll talk about in a moment, we see that it is actually JoJo's birthday, and he's trying to become the man that he thinks his grandfather is, or that he will want him to be. So this idea of developing identity. And then there's also a connection between the natural world and spirituality. Of course, systemic injustices, grief, and mental illness is a topic that is prevalent in pretty much all of Jesmyn Ward's work, because she talks about how it's a topic that is prevalent in her life specifically. So she sometimes pours her own personal experiences into her work as a way of coping. Drug abuse and childhood versus manhood, and also motherhood is another topic that is prevalent in all of Ward's works as well. So those are some themes. And on the next slide is now where I really want people to chime in. I always like to start the discussions with just general reactions to the text before we dive deeper into specific questions, thoughts, or ideas. I've watched a few of your videos, so I kind of know how the interaction works, but would a few people like to share your initial reactions to the piece, the two chapters that we read for today?
Kamisha, do you think we could go away from the PowerPoint for this part of our discussion?
Sure, that's perfectly fine.
Then we could see people. There we
Yes.
are. Thank you. Marcia, did you have an initial reaction?
Yes, I was just blown away by the way in which the very first part, the title and the very first pages take you into a mythical, classic Greek mythical setting. First, the title, of course, which reminds you of the beginning of both the Odyssey and the Iliad, where the muse is invoked. But here it's not a muse who's invoked, it's the ghosts of the past who are invoked to sing their stories and tell us their story. And we get one from the very first chapter when Pop tells a story of begins a story of Snag and Richie. And then we also have the supernatural part where ungiven, speaks to, what's her name, Leona?
Leonie.
Leona. So we see very clearly who is going to be singing. It's not a muse, it's very real people. And also then you begin, the very first scene is the sacrifice of a goat. It invokes the story of Abraham and Isaac. It invokes the way in which the Greeks did sacrifice animals to the gods. It just brings you into this setting is going to be bigger than just the story it tells. It's mythic.
Kamisha, did you want to say anything, or I'll ask Harriet what she has?
Well, I was just gonna say that I agree definitely. She talks a lot about how initially, again, when her writing was rejected, people were saying that it wasn't universal enough. But in your response to the text, I missed your name. I'm sorry, but I saw that you were making different connections to other literary pieces, real life experiences, and noting that definitely these stories are universal, that they are relatable to all manner of people. So I appreciated those connections, and definitely this mythic experience. She talks about how reading kind of these supernatural stories were what she grew up appreciating, and she tried to incorporate that a little bit in Salvage the Bones, but it didn't quite work as well. But of course we get Greek mythology, but how that is definitely a trait that you can expect to continue to see from her. So I'm glad that you appreciated that.
Harriet, and then Pearl, and then Melissa, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I was also thinking about the beginning of the very beginning of the book, but differently, because I was thinking about that sentence. I like to think I know what death is. Um, and I'm thinking about that in a book that is about the undead, about the history that won't die and haunts the novel, and Ward's choice to begin the book with the reality of death, with the blood, the gurgle, with Jojo's fear of death, with his desire to be a man who can see death and not flinch, but the reality of death. While we're also going to be looking at the idea of the undead, the living dead.
What I wanted to say goes right into that, because my first reactions were how beautiful the language is, coming from this boy's point of view, how Ward uses so much figurative language. And so a couple examples just from the first pages that help him understand death, but also help us to be in his world trying to understand death. Talking about ma'am, the chemo done dried her up and hollowed her out. How? The way the sun and the air do water oaks. And then a few pages over, when the father is, Pap is cleaning out the animal. I can't remember what animal it was right now. Maybe the goat. He's slicing. The smell overwhelms like a face full of pig shit. It smells like foragers dead and rotting out in the thick woods. And then the next page, it stinks like possums or armadillos smashed half flat on the road, rotting in asphalt and heat. But worse, this smell is worse, the smell of death, the stink of death. And then this just last one I'll finish up with. Before all the little mean things she told me gathered and lodged like grit in a skinned knee. Now that's not specifically about death like the first ones were, but he uses the natural world to try to understand death before he comes to the undead that is being commanded to sing.
I agree. I'm glad you mentioned that. I actually commented in a different place that and was going to ask the question that animals are just as prevalent as people in this particular text, because like you said, he uses the animals to understand the world. Even when he asks Pop about what is love, is it the fighting that he see the ghost doing, and Pop says yes, but also sometimes it's this. So he learns a lot about life in general from animals. And there are also comparisons. Even in Leonie's section, she compares herself to an animal, and other places where there are animalistic comparisons as well, but not in a negative sense as we would often think of when we talk about animals. But also, in you reading one of those examples, you actually said the word shit. I was wondering if you were going to say it or not, because oftentimes people are turned off by the language. So I was just wondering also how people felt about the language, aside from the metaphors, but other language use in the text as well. But I know 2 or 3 other people have raised their hands, so I'm going to be quiet again for a moment and let them talk.
We're loving to hear you too. Melissa.
I didn't have my hand raised, but I will just, it's okay. I'll just say quickly that I'm struck by how immediately we are thrown into this world. There's not any delay. We're tossed right in, and we automatically understand a lot about the story just from that first chapter. I'll just add that.
My response, and I wonder what you think about this, Commissioner, is that putting JoJo and Leonie back to back these first 2 chapters, and after you've read JoJo's chapter and become so in love with him, you're not much in love with Leonie, and it's going to be hard to hear her voice, but it is a compelling voice as well. And then the other sort of counterpoint that struck me too was the interplay between past and present in both chapters, so that we have day 1 and day 2, but then we're constantly shifting back and forth, and the past commenting on the present and the present commenting on the past. So those things really struck me.
Definitely, of course, tying into that quote that we use as the inspiration, and I completely agree. I honestly, I read Salvage the Bones first and fell completely in love with it, and then I read Ward's memoir and fell completely in love with it. When I read Sing Unburied Sing the first time, I was not in love with it, and part of it is because I did not like Leonie. But after I read it again, I realized that this was very much purposeful. We don't have to like her, but can we see her situation and perhaps empathize with her? But yeah, I agree.
I'll put a little note in to that as well. So I'm listening alongside reading. One of my favorite things to do now is to listen to the audiobook with the book in front of me, and the narrators of these 2 voices are distinct. It's a man and a woman who narrate them differently. And that's a really powerful experience too, because just like Suzanne said, you do feel that, like, you, especially after that first chapter, whenever Jojo calls his mother Leonie for the first time, you feel that, I think, in your spirit too. And then, you do in that next chapter, to hear things in her voice, you begin to empathize with her plight as well.
I'll mute myself so you don't have to hear my dogs.
I'll just add that in Leonie's chapter, there's far fewer figurative languages, examples of figurative language. She's much more real. She's burdened by a different kind of world than what JoJo is. I mean, he's still growing. He's still open to figuring things out. She's got it figured out, and it's bad, bad, bad. You can't think of any other way of expressing those things.
I guess those are our initial reactions then, Commissioner.
Gotcha.
Beverly.
Beverly, we can't hear you.
Beverly, we can't hear you. You're not trying.
Yeah, unmute. I'll unmute you. There, I can do it myself. Well, maybe I can't.
That's good now.
All right. I just wanted to say how much I love the grandparents. Ma'am and Pop they just took my heart up, maybe because I'm a grandmother, but especially Pop. You know, he had a very good blend of strength and discipline about him, but he was also so loving and so caring. And I just had to think what would have happened to Kayla and JoJo had those grandparents not been in their lives. If Leonie had been the one in charge of them totally while Michael was in prison, what would have happened to them? So I loved them greatly.
Yeah. And of course, they're worried about that also as well,
Right.
because, of course, we see in these first few chapters when the first time they do leave JoJo with Leonie by herself, she leaves him home alone, and he winds up with a can stuck in his foot and waiting for his grandparents to return. And even when she's preparing to go to pick Michael up, they're both concerned about her taking the two children alone. And ma'am, of course, suggests that she takes her friend with her so that there might be one more adult there who could perhaps be responsible for the children. So, yes, this idea of, again, motherhood is one that is tackled in all of Ward's works. And oftentimes the mother is not portrayed as the kind, loving, responsible mother that we would hope for. Of course, ma'am is, but Leonie herself is the exact opposite. Yeah, thank you. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
No, I was going to see if anyone else had additional comments before I moved on to something else. No, you're fine.
D. Cross.
That's Dave Crosby.
George
And I would like to go back to the notion of myth that was introduced by the very first speaker. And along with that, there's the presence of ritual. The sacrifice of the goat is clearly a ritualistic activity. There is a really strong connection to the Odyssey where a character is engaged in some combat. He climbs up on the roof to hear something and he falls off the roof. And he's the people with Odysseus leave him without burying him.
Mhm.
And in the very next chapter of the Odyssey, Odysseus has to go down into Hades and confront this person who is not undead, but unburied. And the title is very much, I think, related to that incident. You have to bury the past, get to a sense of completion before you can actually sing the way you need to.
Yeah. I don't know if you've read the whole book or not, but you've essentially summed it up. But thank you for sharing that. And it actually gets to the question I was going to ask anyway. Someone mentioned briefly the opening scene and how it kind of immediately throws us into the story, but also how it has a lot of metaphors. It's very beautiful to read. But I was actually going to ask a question about the slaughtering of the goat. Of course, you mentioned that is very ritualistic, but also I thought it was intriguing that during this ritual, the goat that they slaughter, JoJo has actually named the goat the Big Joseph. And if you remember, Big Joseph is actually his grandfather, whom he says he's only seen twice, who does not recognize him as his grandson, and just refers to Leonie as the black woman that my son had children by. Or he doesn't actually say black woman, actually says another word in the book. But thoughts on this ritual, the slaughtering of the goat, and also the naming of the goat that is slaughtered. Anyone have any additional thoughts
we
on
have
that?
Valerie, did you have something you wanted to say? No? Yes?
Sarah, is there something you'd like to say?
I've enjoyed the discussion so far. Thank you so much, Professor Swanson. I find the first scene, it takes my feet out from under me because I get hit with this really graphic scene of a goat being killed, and yet the entire thing is being done in love. Papa's doing this for JoJo's birthday. He's doing this to feed his ailing wife. So you get the graphic violence that your brain tells you to react a certain way to, but that's wrong because the violence is done in love. So I know from the very first scene that I've really got to think about my reactions to things, that she's really going to mess up the connotations we have with particular things.
Sarah, don't you think that what Kamisha was talking about with the goat being named Big Joseph complicates that too?
Absolutely. JoJo doesn't have a relationship with this grandfather. And on the one hand, he's naming the goat that dies that because he knows how the grandfather feels about him. But on the other hand, JoJo hears the animals' responses, and JoJo's far more sympathetic with them than Pop is, who can't hear them. So it's a kind of wish fulfillment of violence. And yet at the same time, because again, my feet are knocked out from under me, it is him being sympathetic with the animal being killed.
Definitely agree. Any other thoughts on that one?
Suzanne?
Yes.
I put this in the chat, but another reference to classical storytelling is this jumping into the middle of the action in medias res, and the Odyssey and other great stories start in the middle of the action. A lot of times it's in the middle of a war.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
To some extent, this is where JoJo is. And we don't know that until it unfolds a bit more. Also, that structure of in medias res allows the story to start in the present, but jump back into the past constantly to understand the present. And maybe that's what Eudora Welty is talking about too, about the living memory being sort of in transit on a journey.
Yeah. No, I love that. The fact that you're in it immediately is so powerful, I think. There's Marcia, I think.
Yeah, when Sarah talked about the sacrifice or the killing of the goat, in this case is an act of love, it really makes me think, and I may be going way too far, of Isaac and Abraham, where Isaac is saved because God says, no, kill a lamb instead, sacrifice a lamb instead. And so the sacrificing of the lamb in that case also is an act of love.
Definitely.
So it's very violent, the first scene, but it's also all about the regard, the way in which Pop regards JoJo.
And that's something interesting in all of Ward's writing. So we talk about this being a very violent experience or a moment, but it being written or symbolizing something completely opposite. And she does that oftentimes, even in the first book, like I said, that doesn't get as much praise. When something so violent, so negative happens, she paints it in this beautiful picture using nature and spirituality, sceneries that you can visualize and see as beautiful things. But inflicting, like you said, that violence on them. And that's one of the things about her writing that makes it so interesting. She pulls the reader in a way that perhaps you wouldn't be if we had just talked about the violence of slaughtering the goat in general.
Laura?
Well, I just wanted to start by saying that this is my first experience and my first time reading Jesmyn Ward. And so it's wonderful to walk in to meet a new author and but I agree with the description of having your feet sort of pulled out from under you. And, but what I loved was how I felt immediately that I was in the story. I felt immediately like I was part of the story. And then to feel like that storytelling theme is so important. But then it kind of reminded me as well of Edna Earle in The Ponder Heart, in the same sort of way that you are just immediately pulled into to this story that's being told. I like that.
Harriet?
I was thinking about the line in the story where Jojo thinks, I follow the trail of tender organ blood Pop has left in the dirt, a trail that signals love as clearly as the breadcrumbs Hansel spread in the wood. That Sarah's notion of the love that's in this violent blood. I was also thinking about how much these chapters that are about Jojo and Leonie are also about Pop and Mam. We haven't talked much about Mam. I think about we're talking about mothering and Leonie and her inability to love, but there's also her relationship with her mother, the idea of the gift that seems to permeate the family. It's not just the women; it's also Jojo hears animals, and Pop is followed by animals. I'm thinking more. I'm thinking about the other those grandfather characters that Beverly was pointing to.
I'm also interested in Pop as storyteller and the power of the story and what the meaning of storytelling is.
Yeah, because definitely we essentially get two narratives in one. So yeah. Mm-hmm. I will say, I know definitely I agree. We haven't really talked about Mam and her gifts and what she means to the family, but we've talked a lot about love and how Pop's slaughtering of the goat is an act of love. But of course, also on JoJo's birthday, Leonie brings him a cake. Did we see that as an act of love, as flawed as it was? Her attempt, of course, is interrupted by Michael's phone call. But how do we read that particular scene?
Anyone? Beverly?
I think she's doing the best she can. And she didn't get him what he wanted, which would have been some new shoes to go with the one pair he already has, or something tangible that he could keep. But she did keep up with the ritual that Mam normally did, which was to provide a cake. And so I think, it was sort of a failed attempt, later on when the cake is described and, it has to be thrown away and it's a shower cake instead of a birthday cake. But I think that, I think she realizes she's not a good mother. And I think she's trying to do what she can do for this one particular event, which is JoJo's 13th birthday. I'm also, these first two chapters, that's only 58 pages. And just think of what all elements we have looking. I've read the whole book at a different time, but think how much we have to look forward to because she has crammed so much to grab us here at the beginning in 58 pages.
Right. I think someone mentioned earlier kind of Leonie's inability to love, but the comment that you made is actually going to speak to the point that I was going to make, that I won't say that she has an inability. Like you said, she recognizes that she's not a great mother. And that's, Jesmyn mentioned that that's actually part of the reason why she chose to tell the story both from JoJo's perspective and Leonie's. Because had she just told it from JoJo's perspective, definitely we hate Leonie and that be completely it. But when we read the story from her perspective, we can sympathize. She realizes that she did a horrible job buying a shower cake, a cake that didn't taste well. She notices JoJo's expression when she shares the cake, when they're singing, even when she begins to talk about Michael. She sees how he reacts to certain things. And you can see that in other chapters as well, where she notices that she's not doing a good job. But also, we can see her kind of internalize the other issues that she has with grief and drug abuse and things like that, and how they play upon her decision. So if she were a different person in a different time, she would perhaps like to show love in a manner that perhaps Pop does. But she has essentially said that she's in a horrible space and there isn't much that she could do. So she does the least possible. So, yeah.
We have Jane and Adrian, I think.
I just want to say that, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just want to say that these food images, I can't help but put this first part of the story into the whole. Is the first of these images of eating and food that run throughout the novel, and the fact that Leonie cannot provide a decent birthday cake or meal for her son Jojo. This continues throughout the whole story. There she is unable to feed them, and even at the end, Ma'am tells Jojo she cannot feed you, and she's very truthful about this to Jojo, that Leonie cannot provide for her children for whatever reason. And I just keep thinking about all of these food and eating issues that come out throughout the whole book, of which this birthday cake is the first.
That speaks again to, like I said, Jesmyn pulling from her own experiences, this idea of hunger and the fact that Leonie as a mother cannot ease the hunger. Yeah, good point.
Adrian.
Yeah, that I had forgotten that ma'am saying she cannot feed you, but that's really instructive. I was just gonna say, I mean, I really did see it as an act of love, but it's like love as she's an addict, like, the drug addiction. I think in a sense she's addicted to the idea of romantic love with Michael, and therefore, like, her love is flawed, but like at the same time, like, because of the addiction and everything else she has going on, like the amount of executive functioning required to do what little she does, like, I really do read as an act of love. I do think it's the way that JoJo sees it is very valid, and probably pretty healthy that he doesn't he sees her flaws. So I think that's healthy for him. But yeah, I did see it in keeping with the food as love, just the distortion of the addiction is part of that.
Ebony? Oh, we can't hear you.
Okay, what about now?
Now we can, yes.
Okay. First of all, thank y'all. This has been awesome. When you brought that part up about Leonie, of course I read farther into the book, but I honestly am so disappointed in her, like, all the time. Like, and at the beginning, I think about, as a parent, as a mother, whether it's whatever keeps you from, showing love or being empathetic or just, really caring. I feel like if it's true love because you do love your children, or, in the fact of her loving JoJo and Michaela, is it Michaela? The
Yes.
baby? It's like I said to myself, I was like, you need to be here for these children. I almost feel like when she bought the cake, she only bought the cake because she's like, my mama, even though she can barely talk, I know what she's thinking about me. And Pop, he's gonna say something. I feel like she did it out of obligation because it was expected. And like you said, it's kind of ritualistic for her to buy the cake since that's what ma'am used to do. But I just never see that there's ever any joy of her looking at her children. I never see that there's ever any pride, whether or not she's in the best position she thinks she should be in. I just always think she is mad at JoJo. Even throughout the book is certain one, not telling the story, but certain times she want to hit them. And I'm like, they're literally just being children. They're being their age. And then the fact they're not reckless, bad, quote unquote bad children, they're just being kids, doing what kids do. And the fact that JoJo takes on so much responsibility for his baby sister and how Leonie gets very upset that Michaela does not want her, but wants her brother because that's who Michaela sees as her caretaker and not Leonie. But I'm praying that as I farther along, maybe my views will change about her. But at this point, I literally am just like, girl, like, I wish man was in a healthier state to where they would not be dependent on Leonie.
Yeah.
And that's
And thank you for sharing. I do too. At the end of the novel, want to see if your opinion changes. If it doesn't, that's perfectly fine. But I am curious. But I will say, you mentioned the word joy. That I don't think Leonie has any joy at all, even in knowing that she's going to go pick up Michael. When she talks about it to her friend, when she asks if she's happy or does she think Michael will be different, she doesn't show joy in him coming back, but she knows that he's the person who initially saw her, especially after she was grieving over her brother and her parents were also grieving and not really paying her much attention. He's the first person to actually see her. So she's harboring on that particular thing. It doesn't necessarily seem that their joy, their relationship either has much joy because JoJo even talks about how they fight all the time. So I think that she's kind of void of joy in general.
I think we're almost out of time, but we have Alec and Pearl, so we'll get and Kamisha's reaction, and then we'll stop. Okay, go Alec.
The different languages. I love what y'all have said, but also the different languages in the first two chapters make me think of history way back. We've got standard English and non-standard English, and then the few French names that come in there, and which is part of the history of that part of the country. And then she mentions Pop's Indian, the high cheekbones and so on. It's like veils behind the stage. To me, it is, or little scrims or behind the stage in which the action takes place. And then with the supernatural stuff, given, not given, and the healing and so on, we're talking about a deep, deep history there in time and in understanding of human life. Thank you.
Pearl, you want to finish us up here and then we'll let Kamisha speak?
Sure. I just wanted to reiterate something that Valerie put so wisely into the chat, and that is that we are being challenged to withhold judgment about Leonie. And if we just listen to her and live through all of these very real responses and reactions to her, maybe if we withhold our judgment, we'll have an opening to understand her.
Beautiful. Yeah. And I like that actually as a place to end. But I'll just say finally that I really enjoyed this conversation. I was excited about the opportunity, but also a bit nervous because I didn't know completely what to expect. I haven't been in conversation with you all, but have heard some awesome things, and you did not disappoint. So I really, really enjoyed this discussion. You even gave me some things to think about. So thank you all so much for inviting me, and I look forward to discussing the next 2 chapters and the book as a whole with you all in the next coming weeks.
Thank you. Thank all of you. It was great. See you next time.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.